So I am Reverend Julia Nielsen. I am one of the organizers with Levin Community. And I am so excited to get to talk to you tonight about where we are in the spiral. So as you might know, and some folks among us are new, so this language might be newer to you, and feel free to put questions in the chat if you have them and they arise. But we are a part of the organizing spiral, the sacred organizing spiral. And in quarters throughout this 9-month period, we move from and through encounter with ourselves, our neighbors, and land, and then move through to unveiling. We do research meetings, house meetings, we tell story, we show what we know, and then we move through until we get to action, which is coming, and then sacred pause. So we're in that unveiling season right now in the last month of practicing it. And tonight we're going to talk about what we mean by building power through public story. So what do we mean by that? 85% of the time that parents spend with children is spent storytelling. 85%. Stories are how we understand what's important to our families, communicate what is happening in our world, and make sense of our choices. It's how we make meaning. Story is fundamental to being human, and story is fundamental to organizing. So the question is why? Because organizing is, as we've all learned over the last few months and years together, organizing is about moving people. It's about moving their hearts and their feet and their money and their decisions. The language of emotion is the language of movement. Think about it, motion and movement, they share the same root word. It's about moving people. So every single person has at least one compelling story, and each one of those stories feed into the story of all of us and drive us forward to change the world. We tell stories to connect and to heal and to motivate one another. And I would say that actually not just one story, but each of us has many stories to tell, many public stories to tell, because our lives are complicated and diverse. For example, I could tell you a story about why I feel strongly about supporting the mental health of veterans, because I come from a long line of veterans, and I have 2 veterans who have completed suicide in my immediate family. Or I could tell you about why I organize for affordable housing as a home owning person. Or I could tell you about why I advocate for reproductive healthcare services in Idaho as a woman who has needed those services. Any life experience is a possible public story because stories are what we're made of. Terry Pratchett, an author that many of you may be familiar with, says it this way: people think that stories are shaped by people, but in fact, it is the other way around. So how do we actually move people to act? How do we shape stories and become shaped by them and shape others with ours? Moving others to act is about just a couple of things. It's about the how we do it, right? When we're trying to move people, it's about strategy and timelines and numbers, the real concrete pieces. But ultimately, it's about why. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to me? Why does this matter to you? Why does this matter to our future? If we want people to shake up their lives and challenge their routines and challenge themselves and take risks, then it's not enough to tell them what to do. How many of you have tried that? I know I have. Just agree with me. I know I'm right. Here's how you do it. Just do it. It doesn't have any effect on most of the people in my life. It's also not enough to tell them that it matters, that it's important. We have to make people feel the importance themselves. This is what we call in organizing self-interest. And some of us may have a little squidgy feeling about that word. It's neutral. It just means we all have it. We all have an interest in ourselves that then needs to connect to the self-interest of other people. So we need to talk about how to start writing a story. We've talked about like what it is as far as why it's important and what it has to do with organizing, but how do we write a public story? And later on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about places where we actually need to tell our public stories as a coalition and as people who are a part of this work. But first, we need to know what a public story includes. So what a public story needs is a plot. All stories have plots, at least all good ones do. And it's really easy to think about it in 3 parts. So the first thing that a story needs is a call to leadership, or a story of who you are. And then you need a story of choice, this movement from, oh, this is who I am, to here's the choice that I have to make and I'm asking you to make. And then it moves to action. So what? What now? What is it that we have to do? What am I imagining the future to become if your story and my story interweave, and all of a sudden we find ourselves walking together toward a new future? So I want to talk to you about these pieces, and you might want to take a couple of notes if this is unfamiliar to you, because you're going to be using some of these in our time that follows our story teaching, because you're going to write a story tonight. So first, let's go into that story of self, or the call to leadership. This is really about what moves you. So if you think about the story as having 3 parts, you can kind of build it with these building blocks or bricks. You can start with thinking about what's important to me, what moves me, what are my motivations, what's my calling. And then this, as you're describing it, helps others to understand you, not only to test whether they agree with you, but to have compassion for where you're coming from, so they'll keep listening. I imagine that some of you, when I said that I have veteran suicide in my family, felt something, not only for my family, but for me. And maybe you wanted to know more. Even if you disagree with the military, even if you don't agree with something else that I say, that you can connect with, because we're humans and our hearts touch one another. So that's what I mean about this self piece. So you want to, in your story, be moving, not through length or precision, but because you want to share an insight. You do not have to tell your whole life story. This is where we sometimes make some amateur errors. I know it's where I go wrong. You just tell your life's stories. This is why I first decided to take action against injustice, is a good prompt for this. Think about an injustice you stood against. Why did you do that? You want to open with a powerful statement. And this story can be about anything that matters to you. Anytime we tell public story, as long as it matters to you, it's going to be the right story. I will say that something that matters about this too is delivery. You want it to be from the heart. So sometimes it can be tempting to think about like public testimony as dry or as boring or being filled with facts and figures. No, the most effective way to storytell is as a human person from the heart. It doesn't have to be smooth. It just has to be authentic to you. And I will make a note, it should also be true. It should also be true. You want to be concise. You want to communicate the most things in the fewest possible words. So one of the things that's true about telling public story is that editing is most of the work. You want to have the courage to go deep too. If this is that important to you, this thing that you're advocating for, that you want people to come alongside you in, that you have experienced yourself or love someone who has experienced this, it's important to you, you want to express that. What impact has it had? Don't be afraid to say something that hard. So the second part of a public story, after you talk about your own self and why it's important to you, is that you, the storyteller, faced a choice when you came upon this problem or you faced this injustice. You saw someone living under a bridge. This is my own story. I saw someone living under a bridge in 2014 when I moved to Portland. And he was a man who he was reading a book with his dog in a sleeping bag in the rain in Northeast Portland. And I thought to myself, no one should have to live in public like that. And I was faced with a choice, and I felt like I had to respond. I had to respond, and what I did was I started working in housing and homelessness. So you have to ask, what's the choice that you made? What's the choice that you felt you were forced to make? Maybe if you couldn't make a choice at that time, or you haven't gotten to that point of changing something yet, there's a tension you feel. What's that tension? If you did make a choice, what gave you the courage to do that? I would say that I started this work not only because I saw that man, but because people around me were also doing the work, and I didn't feel alone in trying to fix a problem that I knew needed to be solved. So you want to introduce to the tension to whoever's listening to you, from the president of the United States down to your neighbor that you're telling this story to. It doesn't matter who it is. We want what the hearer thinks they know and what they now can't deny they know because of what you said to be in conflict. Man, I thought this, but now I talked to Jules about it, and I don't know if I can think that anymore. We want people to have to choose between the way the world is and the way the world should be, and move toward the way that the world should be. So we want everybody around us and ourselves to act in line with our values. So that's the choice. What's the choice we're asking people to make? So after self and choice, then it's time to move to action. What are you asking for? What's now? So what? Whatever choice you are making or had made, you want to make that everybody's choice. What's the challenge to your community because of what you know and what you've experienced? What's the alternative vision that you have for the world? What hopeful outcome do you want to create together? You just described the world as it is. Here's the problem. Here's why it's important to me. Now you want to describe the world as you envision it if we all come alongside you. That's the third part of public story. There's only 3 parts: your story, what choice needs to be made, and how we're going to get there, what it'll look like when we get there. I want you to think of a time when you were really deeply moved. Maybe you saw a story in the news, or someone you love experienced an injustice. Maybe you saw something happen that scared or fascinated or angered you. I want you to think about that for a minute, and maybe write down a quick note. You're going to write a story in a minute, but I'm going to tell you a story now. So pay attention to my story if you can, and think about your own. What's happening? What's the plot? Maybe listen for my choice, my challenge, the action, any values that are coming up in mine. So I'm going to tell it as though you have not just met me. My name is Julia Nielsen, and I am the 6 times great-granddaughter of Mary Ann Funster, who is just one of my ancestors who have lived and continue to live in Columbiana County, Ohio, since the 1700s. Others who have lived in Columbiana since time immemorial, and in the beach woods and the rivers I grew up playing in with my 2 brothers and my grandparents and my cousins, include the endangered hellbender salamander and the butterfly mollusk and the speckled wood lily. But 2 weeks ago, on February 3rd, a Norfolk Southern freight train heading to Conway, Pennsylvania, derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, in Columbiana, just 20 miles from my grandma's home. 38 rail cars went off the tracks and caught fire, containing vinyl chloride, which causes cancer and is a flammable chemical that was used to poison people and was used as chemical warfare in World War I. Many people, including all of my extended family and many of my childhood friends, drink from well-sprung groundwater in that very area. Groundwater that is now literally able to catch on fire and is bubbling with poison. As of Tuesday, February 21st, Norfolk Southern reported that chemical spill has been contained and that it has contaminated just only 15,000 pounds of soil and 1.1 million gallons of water. That's my family's water. Now, I don't any longer live in Columbiana County. I live in Multnomah County. I'm 3,000 miles away. My water is perfectly safe. And Ohio Governor Mike DeWine and the EPA have told East Palestine residents that the air and water that they are exposed to are safe to drink. But they have not released any data to show that to be true. So I wonder why there are documented images of dead fish and an oily sheen along the Ohio River tributaries that my grandmother lives on days after the spill. Those streams are reintroduction sites for the hellbender salamander. Those streams are where I swam as a child and where my family has fished for 7 generations. That water table flows through the entire Ohio River Valley and ultimately into the Mississippi River. This affects absolutely all of us. A pattern has been set long ago in environmental disasters like Flint, Michigan, and the BP oil spill, and it's being repeated in East Palestine. First, government officials try to deny that any danger to the public exists, and when that's no longer possible, they try to minimize it. And then those who are responsible are let off the hook with minimal consequences, including the EPA and Ohio's legislature. And while the Biden administration claims now that Norfolk Southern will be made to pay for the cleanup, there's not even the suggestion that any of their executives will be held criminally responsible. The residents of East Palestine and neighboring communities like my grandmother's deserve transparency around the EPA's plan for water and air quality monitoring and the data of air tests. They, and I would say we, including the animals and plants who cannot testify for themselves in front of politicians or can't call the White House to demand stricter policies on corporations, deserve transparency in testing and cleanup, and they deserve a clear plan for long-term environmental monitoring. We deserve justice. And our lives, any one of us on this screen, any one of us 25 million Americans who depend on the waters of the Ohio River to live, depend on that same justice. So think about that story that I just told. One of many stories I could have told you. Think about how I could have shaped that story differently to connect to different people. Think about what I could have practiced ahead of time to make it better, to write it down differently, to time it differently. A good story can be any length, but most public stories need to be less than 2 minutes long. And we know that stories are most persuasive when they're very carefully prepared. So if we want people to take us seriously, especially people with power, we need to take ourselves seriously and take the time ahead of time. As you get more practiced, you're going to want to take your stories deeper and play with them. This is just one of, I'd say, a dozen public stories that I've told over the years, not even about the same thing, right? Different topics. You can play with your stories, figure out which is going to work in which space and with which people, what makes sense, who hears parts of my story and who hears which versions of it, what contexts and audiences are more challenging for me, how can I practice that? And you might want to think about how to level up on your story. So I have some growing to do in public storytelling. I need to think more about how to gear my story to different time frames, or how to bridge a statistic to a story, or how to tell or not tell difficult parts of a story well, how to protect people's dignity and privacy when I'm talking about those things. So I want you to think about what it is that your next step in public story is. Maybe you're very experienced and you need to make your stories much shorter. Maybe you've never written a public story before and your level is, I want to write mine down. I want to know how to tell a story to begin with. So we can move into a conversation. I want to share a concrete example with you of Adeline. Can we share Adeline's video, LaVeta? This is one of our very own organizers who has testified successfully in front of some elected officials. I'm going to ask Adeline some questions. Pay attention to Adeline's story.
And I am a student at Oak Grove Elementary. Did you know that 238 children are homeless in the North Clackamas School District alone? That means about 1 in every 50 students in my school. Statistically, half of those kids will be held back a grade or two in their education, Why? Because they don't have a place to live. Kids are twice as likely to attend school regularly when they have a roof over their heads. Studies have also shown that homeless children are sick 4 times more often than children with homes. They will also be more likely to experience hunger, behavioral problems, and delayed development if nothing changes. Giving kids a place to stay will build a happier and stronger community. That's why we need you to say yes to Project Turnkey, because all kids deserve a home.
Thank you very much.
And LaVeta is going to bring Adeline up, and we are going to spotlight her and me. Add spotlight. There we go. So, have you seen your own video before? Have you rewatched that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I have a couple questions for you. One is, what made you want to give testimony about Project Turnkey?
I saw this news story about the people who are against Project Turnkey, and one person said, "Think of the children." And I thought, that's exactly why we need Project Turnkey. So I decided to give testimony so people could hear what I said. I need to say that.
So, your testimony was really powerful and it was real tight. Like, I was impressed with how much you said in such a short amount of time. How did you prepare for it?
I prepared by starting with a prompt to help me write the testimony, and I practiced saying it in front of my parents, and also I timed it to make sure it fit in the time. I also went to Target to find a green outfit, of course.
Right, because everybody from Project Turnkey and support wore green, right? Yeah.
At least I hope.
So you prepared with a prompt, you practiced by saying it in front of other people who were your parents in this case, and you practiced for time. Okay, that's 3 pretty easy steps. What did it feel like when your time allotment was cut from 2 minutes to 1? Because I know that happened to you.
Yeah.
You thought you had more time than you did, right?
Yeah. At first, I was a bit stressed out, but my mom helped me cut it down a bit so it would fit the time frame. And actually, I like the shorter version better because it was more compelling and more to the point. So, win-win.
I think, yeah, it's totally a win-win. I mean, it's hard though, right? When you find out like this thing you worked on really hard now has to be a little bit shorter. It was really good though. Were you nervous, and what made you nervous?
At first, I was struggling a bit with writing the testimony. And I was worried that the words wouldn't be good. And I was also nervous about talking in front of a lot of people. But when I got in the chair, I just felt a lot calmer and ready to do it.
Well, I am so glad that you were brave enough to do it and that you gave us such an amazing example, because I think all of us in this room, all 50 adults now, probably have a lot more courage to try to do something that you did so beautifully. So thank you, Adeline, for being willing to talk with us and for passing Project Turnkey, which is such a big deal. Good job. All right. Anna's going to stay with us, and we're going to bring Story up for just a tight minute because we want to talk a little bit about the work that Adeline just described. Our Clackamas County cohort has been deep in the weeds with Project Turnkey, helping to turn motel sheltering into a real housing opportunity for folks in the community. So Story and Anna, you want to quick introduce yourselves and then share a little bit about what happened in the room that Public Story made possible.
I'm Anna, heartbeat holder for Clackamas County.
Hi everyone, I'm Story and I'm on the Clackamas County design team.
So what'd you see? What changed because of Public Story in that space?
Do you want to start off with kind of like where we started?
Yeah, so in October, back whenever everything got started, we knew that we were going to have to organize this time. We had seen it go poorly in the past. We saw that we had not mapped the power. We hadn't organized enough. So Turnkey 1.0 got shut down. And so when 2.0 was coming around, we were like, we need to put some time and energy into coming alongside people to bring them along on this with us, because we're going to need voices in there. because we knew that a big part of the reason it got shut down before, that there was only one narrative in the room. There was only one story being told about transitional housing, about Clackamas County, about who would use this. So we knew we needed to organize people to be able to tell a different story. So we did a training in October that 30 or so people, I think, came, 30 to 40. Oh yeah, we had online too. Showed up to kind of learn how to give public story, to tell the story of me, the story of us, the story of now. So that's kind of how it started. And then that's who we saw come into the space, start coming with us in October and really changing the narrative of that room.
And I think what was really compelling for me is seeing that at that initial training, when we asked at first, like, who felt ready to give public testimony, I think like a few people raised their hands.
People were like,
yeah, like, no, thank you. And then by the end, we asked again, and they were like, okay.
Yeah.
So these are people who are like by no means experts at public story, right? And like maybe we're not feeling super confident about that, but they were willing. And when they first came and told the stories, I was blown away because like I felt them so compelling.
Cheers.
Because story cried.
Yeah, I definitely did.
Because they were honest and they were personal, right?
Yeah.
And they were clear.
Yeah.
And we saw every time that also impact the other people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
One county staff member just last week at a public meeting shared that our coalition showing up at these meetings changed the course of this vote. That it made something possible in Clackamas County that just wasn't possible before.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that as he sat in the room, this was at the final turnkey vote, where there were 50 people who were showed up to testify, yes, and 45 who showed up to testify, no. And he said, as he sat in that room, he was like overwhelmed every time someone got up from our group to give testimony and said that they were the most compelling testimonies he's ever heard in that space. Yeah. And again, it's not because we had experts, right? It's because people showed up with what mattered to them. They cared about it.
And we also saw this really impact even the opposition in the room, especially in some of the early meetings, where it was like the launching off point, because whenever you come prepared, when you come prepared with the statistics and the story, like bringing all of that together, people have to do a pretty big, like, a jump of cognitive dissonance to not then engage with the new story being told. And we were able to see some opposition actually engage with the story.
And it seems too that especially in this case, it humanizes something that is really easy to dehumanize, right? We're talking about people who are not here. This doesn't affect, we're not talking about real people. And then the stories you all brought, it was real people, and you can't deny that you're talking to somebody who really this matters to. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, that was one of the things in the room that felt like really important, that I thought, even if we don't win this, this is why this matters. Because when there's a dehumanizing narrative, it's like, it's our call to tell the human story that counteracts that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for doing that work. We're going to move into practicing stories now so that folks can join Clackamas in its expertise and in its practicing of that you've been doing for Project Turnkey. So here we go, friends. We have talked about, right? You have a story of self. You have a story of choice to make, and you have a story of action. Where do you want it to go? And we're going to invite you for just 5 minutes to write something down. You don't have to get perfect. You don't have to have all the words. Just start to frame out, if I were to tell a story, maybe it's about housing. Why is, for example, we're about to try to pass the governor's budget for $1.41 billion for housing and human services. Why is that important? Why do you care that we have money at the state level for housing? Just why is this important to me? What choice do we need to make? And what will it make different if we have it?
Oregon 97015, and delegating signature authority to the chair and county commissioner to execute all documents reasonably necessary to complete the closing of the purchase of the property.
Second.
Commissioner Schrader has made a motion for the approval of the board order, and Commissioner Savas has seconded that motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Tony, take the poll.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Nay.
Commissioner Shull,
No.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 3-2. Thank you very much.